for educational purposes only, drawing from our professional and educational experiences and opinions. Please use this information at your own personal or professional discretion. We are not liable for anything you do with this information. All are welcome to contribute electrical questions. No free advertising for any organization or personal business. Please do not mention names of individuals, organizations, or municipalities. No profanity. Respectful dialogue only. No electrical code calculation questions. No engineering questions. Now, tune in for valuable insights and join the conversation. Please, no code calculation questions.
Good evening. Welcome to Ask the Lady Electrical Inspector podcast. I am your host, Tabatha L. Tonight, I will provide critical feedback and answer questions regarding Article 110.26, Space about Electrical Equipment, Working Clearance, common reasons why this article failed inspections. The main electrical room plays a crucial role as a distribution center in every new construction project. Designing a building must involve careful consideration of this critical space. As an inspector, I have observed a concerning trend. Electrical rooms are shrinking while accommodating more electrical equipment, placing electrical contractors and electricians in the challenging positions of redesigning these spaces to meet the National Electrical Code requirements. This task is no small feat, requiring extensive planning and on-the-job designing. Always check with your local authority having jurisdiction for specific interpretations and requirements regarding Article 110.26. In tonight's episode, I will explore the minimum requirements for installing electrical equipment. These requirements are vital as they form the foundation for the initial stages of the electrical construction process. In this episode, I will answer industry questions highlighting significant NEC requirements outlined in Article 110.26, Space Electrical Equipment. I will provide insight on identifying common warning signs to be mindful of during your organization's responsibility to ensure safety and to avoid potential NEC violations. I have a caller on the line. Good evening, caller.
So thanks for taking my call. My name is Willie Snyder from Denver, Colorado. And I was just going to ask you, in Article 440, they actually reference the compliance with 110.26a. And when would you say that is equipment that's not likely to be worked on while energized? Thanks for taking my question.
No problem. So Article 440 is air conditioning and refrigerating equipment. And what section are you referencing with 110.26?
So it's basically my understanding when we do some of these multifamily dwelling units that if you have like a non-fused disconnect, that you're not really required to have the working clearance because that piece of equipment's not likely to be worked on while energized because you're not checking any fuses or anything. And so I don't know if there's any truth to that or not when you look at 110.26a.
Okay, so I do have the code book open, and do you have that specific article where you're referencing with the working clearance? Because as I perform inspections on a daily basis, and there are some AC units that do have fusible, unfusible disconnects. But because it's electrical equipment, it still requires servicing. So I'm trying to make sure I'm getting the content of your question to make sure that I can help you find that in Article 110.26. So in Article 440, what are you referencing specifically in that article? Because I'm at 400.14 locations.
I'm trying to look it up. Actually, our jurisdiction's in the 2023, and I believe it was a code change for 2023.
I'm in 23.
I wanted to say it was like 440.14, but
okay, I got 440.11. Disconnecting means I'm there.
Oh yeah.
440.11 disconnecting means shall be capable. It has to be readily accessible. I'll just read that article for the viewers. 440.11 general disconnecting part 2. Disconnecting means shall be capable of disconnecting AC equipment and refrigerating equipment, including motor compressors and controllers, from the circuit conductor. If the disconnecting means is readily accessible to unqualified personnel, any enclosure, door, or hinges covered of a disconnecting mean enclosure that expose energized parts when open shall require a tool to open or capable of being locked. So that tells me that that it has to be accessible and it has to have accessibility, readily accessible with those AC units. And so
I do agree with that. And if you look down to 440.14, it has a little highlighted change in there, and it says about that it must comply with 110.26a.
Yep, see that.
My argument is that oftentimes there's some of this AC refrigeration equipment that is not likely to be worked on while energized. So, like, let's just say you have like a unit controller, then you would actually shut the power off prior to servicing. So that's something that we've talked about with 70E, and I just like to see how you enforce that, being AHJ, being an inspector. So appreciate it.
Okay. So for my municipality, when enforcing disconnects for AC units, that's an issue that comes up often because if you have power at that AC unit, you have to have a disconnect, and it has to be readily accessible. So a disconnect is required, and you have to have the working clearance to work around it because we're referencing that 110.26a, and I have that article right here. Let me go to it. 110.26a. Working spaces. Working spaces for equipment operating at 1,000 volts or less to ground and likely to require examination, adjustment, servicing, as you were mentioning, servicing, or maintenance while energized shall comply with the dimensions of the Article 110.26 1A, 2, and 3. So let's go look at that. I think that's the conditions. So answering that question, if it requires examination or adjustments or servicing or maintenance while energized, it has to comply with that. So I'm going to go to Article 1. I'll go there now. 126.
So one of the things I look at is with the guidelines of NFPA 70E, nothing really says that you have to have a working clearance to test for the absence of voltage. So we have to do like our live test where we test for the absence of voltage, but nothing in 70E really says that it has to have, that it's required to have working clearance to test for the absence of voltage. So and you're just testing for the absence of voltage, that would not be.
I'm not understanding the wording, the optical voltage? What voltage are you saying?
So I'm just basically saying, if it's not likely to be worked on while energized, that all you're doing is you're testing for the absence of voltage. That's not technically working on it. So it's just been kind of a talk that we've kind of talked about through the field to kind of see where you would draw that line to say that working space clearance is not required if you're just going to be checking for the absence of voltage.
For the absence of voltage. That's what you're saying,
yes,
the absence of voltage.
Yes.
So you're just
Yes.
checking, like you're measuring, or you're just checking are you doing it with, like you're just testing the voltage?
Yeah, you're just verifying it's de-energized. So you're verifying electrically safe work conditions. So I just don't know.
So how would you do that if you didn't have working clearance?
Well, a lot of the disconnects that we've noticed lately, they actually have little pinholes for your testing equipment to go in so that you're not exposing live energized parts. So it's just something that we've kind of talked about with like the new equipment out these days. I just didn't know how you enforce that as far as if there's any condition where you don't require working clearance or you don't see it as being like a hazard to personnel if all you're doing is just checking for the absence of voltage.
The absence of voltage. So where would you check that at? Would that be in the inside of the inside? Because the article also has inside conditions and outside conditions. So would that be inside or outside?
So that would be wherever your disconnect would be located in.
The disconnect would be located at both sides. Wherever you have voltage, line voltage, the disconnect has to be within sight. So that can be outside and inside. A disconnect is required.
True. And I've seen cases where they've had these condensers on the side of a building where you have to get a ladder to get to the disconnect. That's technically not readily accessible, but
that's right.
It's readily accessible from the equipment. So if you have to get a ladder to access the equipment, you have to get a ladder to access the disconnect. So I was just curious if there was
because the authority having jurisdiction here, that is an issue which you just stated, because it has to be readily accessible. And if you look up that definition, that means without getting a ladder or climbing over any obstructions. So for us, we do have a policy on that as well. So authority having jurisdiction where the AC unit has to be on a platform. So there is, for us, that's authority having jurisdiction where we actually enforce that.
So if you had an AC condenser, let's say on a roof, is that considered readily accessible because you'd have to get on the roof to get access to the equipment? So would that...
Not necessarily, because you can have rooftop units, because I just did an apartment complex where they had over 200 rooftop units on a flat roof.
Uh-huh.
So that's possible because it's accessible by walking on the roof. Now, the equipment that comes into play, what type of wiring methods you would use, but that's accessible. Now, of course, you're not going to have an AC unit on a pitch roof because that's not accessible. You know, that doesn't make sense. But in these commercial buildings, you can have rooftop units.
And you would consider those disconnects readily accessible because you have to get on the roof, the same way as like a GSDI or service equipment, correct?
Yes, the disconnect is actually located right next to the air conditioner. Depending on the layout of the unit, it has to be readily accessible. So the disconnect is accessible because it's located right next to the unit. That's why you need one outside and you need one inside.
Got you. Yeah, and I guess part of the reason that we kind of have this argument is we argue the 110 26A, and I believe I've heard you in some of your podcasts talk about where you have these VAV units up in the ceiling, and sometimes it's almost impossible to get like a working clearance on them. But if you look at, are you really required to have that working clearance if you have to shut that switch off prior to opening that cover?
Okay. So how I would enforce that would be, as the code would, if you have any wiring accessible, I think it's 314.27 or 29. It's one of those. If you have any wiring, electrical wiring, it has to be accessible. Any components that require servicing or maintenance must be accessible. And working clearance must, that's a big one as well, because I actually have that issue sometimes, where those VAV units are bumped up against a wall or they have to cut out access panels. So that is required.
So I guess it's hard for me to understand, because when you're accessing those VAVs, you have a lot of times you're above a grid ceiling, and that's grounded materials that's in the working space. So I guess I don't understand what would be like considered how you're safely working on that and isolating yourself from the grounded materials that's in the working space.
Well, maybe that would be an engineering question, because if they design it, we go by the approved set of plans, and that's where they're placing those VAV units in the ceiling. So as an electrician, you have to be trained to be able to work on certain equipment, because you can be on a ladder or you could be on a one-man lift. So
but
it's possible.
Wouldn't you have to be above the grid ceiling to be clear of like those grounded materials to be in that working space?
What grounded materials are you talking about?
The grid ceiling. So like if you have, let's say, working clearance above the ceiling, fine, but when you're working on it, you're actually touching grounded materials at that ceiling height. So I guess it never really made sense to me, because we've had a lot of trouble trying to get working space on those. And what the AHJ did on the last job I was on was determine that that's not equipment that's likely to be worked on while energized, because there was no fused component. So you're going to kill the power, and the only thing you're going to do in that area is verify for the absence of voltage prior to working on it or anything of the requirements of 110.26a.
If you're verifying the absence of voltage, there's something there in that component, in that area. So what you're saying is that there's what are you checking for? You're checking for a wire, because voltage has to go through a conductor. So what are you checking for? So it's wiring in that area, and that wiring has to be accessible.
I agree. I just think that I never understood the VAV one where they try to say you have to have working clearance for these VAVs, because a lot of times they're almost impossible to get. Let's just say, for example, these ones were 480 that we're working on in the last building. It was impossible to get 3'6" is what the code would require for working clearance.
Okay.
And a lot of them we couldn't even get 24 inches. And then let's just say that you're gonna go with what we're talking about with 110.26a. That's the work you're performing. You're basically in contact with grounded materials with that grid ceiling. Regardless, even if you did have 3'6", you still have to you have to be in contact with less than 3'6" of grounded materials in that working space. So I just never understood how.
So you're saying two things. Okay. You're saying two things. So I'll touch on that one question you asked, and I hope I remember the other one. So with the distance between, I understand what you're saying on that because that's where the authority having jurisdiction. And that's where that 30 inches come in at, because you have to have that working space as well. But I understand because sometimes you're not going to be able to get that 3 foot if you're working with the live parts or the concrete. You're not going to be able to get that, or drywall.
Right.
Now, we have leeway there. And as long as, now, how I would do it as an inspector, because I always ask my electricians to demonstrate. If they can safely get there and actually open it up, act as if they're servicing it. And if I see them doing that, I will pass that because it can be done. So that's where the leeway come in.
Okay.
That's the leeway. But now the question that you're asking about the components, if you're checking for voltage, there's components there, so that must be accessible. Has to be accessible.
Well, yeah, I agree with it being accessible, but the 110.26a basically doesn't say, like, it doesn't say that it's required if it's not likely to be worked on while energized. So, like, if you're not using like a justified, energized work where you're actually going in there with the equipment energized, if you de-energize that equipment and all you're going in there to do is verify the absence of voltage, that's not considered working on it by the National Electric Code.
Well, I beg to differ because it says while energized, and you're saying it's not, but it says examination, adjustments, and servicing, or maintenance while energized. So it gives you 3, examination, adjustment, and servicing. So all 3 of those, you're doing something as an electrician. You can be examining, like you're saying, and servicing with the checking of the voltage, and adjustments if something needs to be adjusted, and you shall. So shall in the code mean it must. There's no ifs, ands, and buts. It has to happen. So that's not giving you a way out. So
I mean,
that's how I would enforce that.
I 100% agree with you. It's just when you're saying examination is actually manipulating conductors while energized, and I don't see that you're doing that with the absence of voltage, just, testing for the absence of voltage. You're not manipulating the conductors. You're not doing anything with the components of the equipment. It's deemed to be de-energized. You're not, like, to me, when I get my guys in justified energized work, I know that it's going to be turned on while they're working on it. It's not going to be verified to be in electrically safe work conditions. So that's kind of where I think there's a little gray area in there. But I really appreciate you. I really appreciate you taking my call, and thank you so much. I appreciate you joining my groups and stuff on Facebook, and I really appreciate it. It's meant a lot.
Thank you. Well, anytime you have a question, just give me a call, and I'm going to continue because we did have time there, but thank you for calling. You have a great day.
And thank you so much for answering my question. I appreciate it. You have a good night.
You as well. Thank you. Okay, I will answer more questions. Let me get to some important questions. Okay, so if a suspended ceiling is installed inside an electrical room, will this have an effect on the working clearance? No. Article 110.26E1D, suspended ceilings. A drop ceiling, suspended or similar ceilings that does not add enough strength to the building structure shall not be considered a structural question. Can a sprinkler water line be installed above an electrical equipment? Sprinkler water line, no. Sprinkler protection piping is not permitted directly above dedicated equipment. Article 110.26E1, dedicated equipment space. The space equal to the width of the depth of the equipment and extending from grade to height 6 feet above the equipment shall be dedicated to the electrical installation. No piping or other equipment foreign to the electrical installation shall be in this section. Sprinkler protection. Sprinkler protection shall be permitted for dedicated spaces where the piping complies with this section. So the catch there is that in Article 110.26 E1C, it states that the sprinkler protection is permitted for the dedicated space where the piping complies with this section. So for dedicated spaces above electrical panels or electrical distribution panels, you have to have a working dedicated space of 6 feet. So that's why the sprinkler protection pipe would not adhere to this section. So 110.26E1 supersedes the sprinkler protection. Question: is there a certain distance that communication cables must maintain between unprotected line voltage? Yes. Article 110.26A1B, low voltage, by special permission. Small working spaces shall be permitted where all exposed live parts operate at not greater than 30 volts, 42 volts, 60 volts DC. Question: when replacing an existing electrical panel, does the NEC requires a lighting outlet? Yes. Article 110.26D, illuminations. Illumination shall be provided for all working spaces about service equipment, switchboards, switchgear, enclosed panel boards, or motor control centers installed indoors. Control by automatic means shall not be permitted. So what that's telling you is that a lighting outlet, illuminations, must be controlled by premise wiring. You are not allowed to have a motion switch. If you do, the motion switch must be able to be manually overridden if it fails. A question that I have often received: can you use a battery light? Like they sometimes advertise on TVs, the LED lights, can you use a battery light in that electrical area? No. The lighting outlet must be on premise wiring. That means the home electrical system. You may not use lighting a battery light in electrical areas. Question: the customer wants to upgrade to a 200 amp service from a 100 amp existing service. The upgrade is for additional heating and cooling for the second floor. The 6 foot the 6 foot headspace cannot be met due to a raised floor and HVAC duct in front of the panel. Was that your question, caller? Would this be approved if I change the service at this location? Yes. This would pass inspection because there is an article at Article 110.26A3, Exception 2, existing dwelling units. Existing, not new construction, existing service equipment or enclosed panel boards that do not exceed 200 amps shall be permitted in spaces where the height of the working space is less than 6.5 feet. So there is an exception in existing dwelling units. Question: can electrical panels be installed in a closet? Are there any exceptions? No. Article 240.24D. In the in the vicinity of easily ignitable materials. Overcurrent protection devices shall not be located in the vicinity of easily ignitable materials, such as clothes closets or linen closets. Now, they are allowed to be installed in utility closets. Question: if your local utility handbook manual is not listed in your municipality ordinance, can any part of this manual be enforced by the local municipality? As an inspector, I reference both the NEC and the Utility Service Manual. The Utility Service Manual also requires service equipment to be listed. Our local jurisdiction, the Utility Manual, Section 300, page 44, states that equipment must be certified and approved. Testing laboratory use the appropriate UL standard. So the utility company, they recognizes the underwriter laboratory, and they want the equipment to be UL listed as well. I use both, and it's required because they have requirements that the NEC recognize, as well as the NEC have requirements that they recognize. So yes, I would say you should consult your local utility company, and they will have National Electrical Code articles that must be adhered to. Question: can my insurance company be considered an authority having jurisdiction? Yes, an insurance company can serve as an authority having jurisdiction for specific purposes. An authority having jurisdiction, whether an organization or an individual, responsibility for enforcing codes and standards aimed at safeguarding individual access. Some electrical work can be mandated by the homeowner association or insurance companies. Checking my time. So, yes, the insurance companies, because sometimes the insurance companies, they will enforce that you change panels. Like there's a specific brand, and I won't say the name, but the initials FP. Those are recommended by the insurance company to be changed. But if they are in good working condition, the authority having jurisdiction will not enforce that you change that panel out. That would come from your insurance company. So they do have authority to enforce certain standards. Question: I am installing a 1200 amp, 3-phase, 277, 480 volt electrical service on a new construction project. The electrical room is extremely small. What are the working space requirements? That would be 110.26A1. Now, some of the things to look out for when the electrical rooms are extremely small would be the double the working clearance space, the double the working area, and the egress doors. If you need to double and you can't do that, you need 2 ways of egressing. So make sure you check for that. And another issue that I've had with the smaller electrical rooms, the swing of the door. If you're in an electrical room, the swing should swing out. And you also have to have listed panic hardware. I want to move on quickly because I'm running out of time. I want to get to as many questions as I can. Can electrical engineers use the NEC as a design book? Yes. When designing an electrical construction project, electrical engineers primarily rely on the National Electrical Code, also known as the NFPA 70. The National Electrical Code offers standard guidelines for safe electrical system installation and design throughout the United States. The National Electrical Code sets the benchmark for safe electrical systems, protecting people and property from electrical hazards, and is enforced in all 50 states. The National Electrical Code will provide details on wiring methods, equipment specifications, and installation requirements. They also use other publications such as local building codes, UL standards, manufacturer specifications, and the IEEE, the Institute of Electrical and Electronic Engineers. Question. I had an electrician come out to my house to give an estimate for an upgrade. My electrical panel for an upgrade for my electrical panel to balance the load. The electrician said that he can upgrade the panel and would need to check the balance after the upgrade to see where the balance needs to be. He wants $7,000 just for the upgrade, and another electrician quoted $3,800 for the upgrade and could not give an estimate for the balance load until he starts the work. Mm-hmm. I am not sure which quote to believe. How do I know if this price is correct? It seems overly expensive. I don't know the area or the location you're calling in, but that does seem extremely high. I'm not an electrical contractor, but my recommendation, I don't know how old your home is as well. If you have a 60 amp panel, I would just recommend that you upgrade to a 100 amp panel. And that would take care of any balancing of the load, because you're going to have more slots in the panel, and the electrician would know how to evenly distribute that load if you upgrade the panel. Because right now, with a 60 amp panel, or if you have a 100 amp and you need to upgrade to 125 or 150, any upgrade of amperage would take care of your balancing load. That really does need to be done if you have that issue, because over what could happen if a panel is not balanced, the overheating of the breakers, if a breaker is overloaded due to too many high appliances, the breaker could trip frequently. That could be a problem that you are experiencing. Uneven voltage distribution, unbalanced panel, and a higher electricity bill. So that would be my recommendation, just to upgrade. If you got a 60 amp, go to 100. If you have a 100 amp, go to 125 or 150. That should take care of that problem and save you money. Okay. Now I will provide insight on identifying common warning signs to be mindful of during your organization's responsibility to ensure safety and avoid possible NEC violations. When I'm doing inspections, sometimes I'll give you real-world locations where I see working clearance issues, and I'll go through this briefly. Because I am short on time. And I would like to thank that caller. That's my very first call, and thank you for putting me to the test. So, in restaurants, the number one violators of obstructing the electrical panel. So you would always want working clearance in front of your electrical panels. So restaurants are guilty of that because they have all type of materials, cookware, ingredients, food, shelvings, napkins, I see cups stacked in front of the panel. That's a fire hazard and a safety hazard. If anything happens to the panel, you wouldn't be able to get to the panel. Hospitals, in electrical sub rooms, where working equipment is likely to be, I have seen wheelchairs, walkers, personal protective equipment, shower chairs, crutches. Warehouses, I've seen pallet jacks, pallets, forklifts blocking the electrical panel, shelving, packaging, and boxes. schools. In closets, I have seen desks, tables, books, and computers. In retail stores, clothing, display racks, mannequins, to name a few. Got a little time. Gas stations, they're another guilty one. Snacks, tobacco products, newspapers, and maintenance supplies, cleaning supplies. I've seen that. In office buildings, office equipment, supplies, including machines, furniture, and copiers, and computers. Tune in next Wednesday. I will give a list of electrical requirements for Article 200, use and identification of grounded conductors, and answer frequently asked questions. My goal is to be proactive in preventing future non-compliant issues before the inspection happens. If you would like to be a guest on Ask the Lady Electrical podcast, please contact me on my social media platforms, Facebook, Instagram, X, YouTube, under the moniker Ask the Lady Electrical Inspector. Or email me at asktheladyelectricalinspector@gmail.com. Comments or feedback or would like to add to this discussion, please email me at asktheladyelectricalinspector@gmail.com with any questions or concerns. Thank you for tuning in, and good night.